don't know, we are a workplace well-being platform. We also do culture and culture curation for our companies and our landlords. So we're super excited to have you here. This is a conversation series in partnership with Global Women for Wellbeing. We are super happy with this partnership because we get to get amazing speakers like Rex Miller on our platform. So just a little bit of background. Rex Miller works at the intersection of workplace and disengagement, toxic cultures, health, and well-being. He believes that healthy teams are the secret to strong teams. He's written numerous books, including The Commercial Real Estate Revolution, and won the Coronet Global Innovator Award. So Rex, I know you have a lot to say about space, about well-being, about culture, about the pandemic. So I'll just kick you off with a question, and it's like, how should we use space and design to reduce stress? What do you think about that?
Yeah, thank you, Janera, and thank you for the invitation to be on this platform. One of the things we look at is that space embodies what's important to you. That's another way to say values. We know that because of the event, hybrid work, people are going to the long period of working from home. That by definition has disrupted the normal habits and patterns and routines people have. And that embodies culture. So this is a perfect opportunity to use design to reshape what we value. What's important to us. Is coming together important? For some it is, some have decided not necessarily. Looking at the workplace through the lens of reducing stress. One of the clients we work with takes a touch point approach to reducing stress through design. And they look at all the touch points that an employee has from the time they walk into from the time they come to the parking lot through, and they rank each of those touch points as either a friction point, a neutral point, or a point of delight. And so that gives them kind of a way to look at how do we reduce the stress. Some people, I was just on a call this morning with a group looking at, there's a new way to look at introvert, extrovert in the workplace. How do we reduce stress acoustically? How do we reduce stress through giving more voice and choice in space? All of these things now we're looking at design. One of my clients said, we're now looking at design through how our employees experience it, not through our standards, not through kind of generic space optimization. So what's going on is things that have been chronic in the workplace in terms of the challenges of disengagement, even health, are now acute. And that's forcing companies to look at it through a new lens. So I like the lens that one of my clients is doing is through how do we reduce the stress through the individual lens in the workplace and improve their experience versus just redesigning kind of the generic 20% are going to work at home, 40% are going to be in the office, 60% are going to be hybrid. I think there's better ways.
Do you think that will increase cost if we have to do it on an individual basis for the employer?
No, it doesn't have to. I mean, we've got great case studies from previous research projects where one client actually increased the density of the workplace by over 40%, which reduced the cost, but improved the engagement because it was a better, they looked through it through the lens of activity, the activities that the workplace is doing. And so they designed around activity workplace design. And because of that, it was a much more effective use of space than before. We waste a lot of space. I mean, look at the IFMA studies or the Coronet studies that utilization is under 40 to 50% of space is actually utilized at any given point. So again, this is shining a light that we have much more effective ways of doing it. And the clients who are thinking ahead are doing it that way.
So what are some examples like of this individualized workplace?
Yeah. So if you think of throughout the day, for me, throughout the day, I might migrate through a space and go to a space where we can have small conversations, or a space where we can visualize our thought. So it's a separate space, or an area where it's just a chill area, where the normal break rooms have more of a work essence to it as well. Or I can go heads down to another area. And so you're not tailoring a space for each individual. You're
Ah,
giving people option to migrate through the way they use the space. And so thinking about, doing some really good reflective, how do our people really work here? And thinking about workflow, how does work actually flow through our areas? One of the case studies totally broke down 5 major silos in the company by giving people the option, and they call them neighborhoods. So they have a neighborhood, and so they have a place of identity, but they can go to other people's neighborhoods, and it really improved going from kind of individualized or departmental kinds of work to more team-based work.
right. That's good. And how do you see with this individualized workflow, what is the role of materials in this? Like how does materials affect us? Because like the thought for me after having been away to go to an office with these synthetic materials and these, neon lights overhead is not very attractive.
Yeah. Now, I'm not the expert on that. Kevin and Carrie Burke with Parabola Architecture are some of the best experts in that kind of the materiality or the central nature of the experience. Uh, but everybody knows, you're attracted to certain areas that make you feel good. One of the companies we worked with found that they had this break room area that nobody was using, and because they were laminate surfaces and uh, cold and a bit sterile, when they moved it to they changed the main break room table to a communal table with wood, and they brought in wood from a restored area from a craftsman, and they changed the seating to more natural kinds of materials, and then all of a sudden it was being used. So I think companies will need to experiment. There's not a one size fits all. You may think this is great for you, but uh, a great example is companies building common spaces and building one common space. And so if you have one space, that's not common. The University of Pennsylvania made common spaces through their landing areas and their stairs and got great usage because there were many of them. So unintentionally, your spaces communicate, do I have permission to use it or not? Can I speak loud here or do I have to be quiet? So all of those things designers are really great at thinking about what's the message. Every space has a voice, and that voice tells you what it's for and what's permitted. So looking through that lens, I think this is a great opportunity to look through the lens. What behavior do we want? What do we want to encourage? And then how do we design for that?
Right. And do you think now that with COVID and the PTSD that people are experiencing, the role of space becomes, I'm sure you're going to say yes, even more important, but like how can we strategically support people coming back to the office?
Yeah, that's a great question, and that's got to be a conversation because it's going to be different. But you can imagine some people going through grief, having lost the connections of their people, the friends and the colleagues they had. So I think in some ways there has to be this coming together again space, some places that are very safe to come to and talk and share stories. Um, and there are going to be some things we have to be aware of that might trigger people, trigger emotions, because that's what happens when people experience trauma. Um, they're coming back, and if the emphasis is back into production and back into work, that stress is going to build up, and they have a lower tolerance for that stress than they had before. So they may act out in ways. Uh, that's, again, that's outside my area of expertise. So a good clinical psychologist and a good designer, and looking at the story that, what has this experience been for your people, all has to be brought in. And those are all different disciplines that most companies aren't used to bringing in to help think through what is the environment. It's, medical patients, evidence-based design for medicine uses, what does the patient need to heal? What do they need to be comfortable? I think those are the questions that we'll need to be asking, and bringing the people that know how to help with those discoveries.
Right. So it feels like we as maybe employers need to be much more sensitive to people when they come back to the
Yes.
office. I mean, we thought everybody was going to come back after Labor Day, and that didn't
Right.
happen. And now people are hoping that the workers are going to go back in January. We'll see if that happens, obviously dependent upon
Maybe, yeah.
on many things. So so imagine say 50% of the workplace, just given the 50 doesn't want to go back to the workplace.
Yeah.
The original workplace, the way it was, right? So
Yeah.
what,
Right.
as a futurist, what do you see?
Well, I see lots of tension, because let's say the management want people to come back, but people say, I don't feel safe coming back. So how do you say you must come back? So thinking through that whole change process, a colleague of mine, Dr. Jernigan, who's a clinical psychologist that specializes in PTSD and burnout, we tried to develop a little bit of a workbook and a manual, because these are going to be the challenging conversations. And one of the things I think employers should do is have an evidence-based way for people to self-assess whether they're ready to come back or not. Am I taking care of a dependent? Am I taking care of somebody who has underlying health conditions? Is my spouse out of work? Do I have the right environment to work at home? All those things, because right now there is no evidence-based way to help someone decide whether they're ready to come back to work or not, and no vehicle for a company to have that conversation to say, no, we need you to come in. So giving people tools, and again, that gets back, Janera, to that voice and choice. If you give people the right information and some ways to self-assess, they can say, okay, it's safe for me to come back to work.
Yeah.
And we do have an assessment template that people can use. It's free. At least everybody's going to have a different set of questions that are important to them, but at least this gives them a start.
Right. So on the platform, I think I was just telling you before, on the Better Spaces platform, we're going to be hosting content from the International Well-Building Institute, IWBI, where we'll have content for people to self-assess whether they're ready, or whether they know how to behave properly with COVID. And so it teaches about the pathogens, but it also teaches good behavior. So we're very excited about that coming.
Yeah, I think that's going to be a key to helping management who wants people to come back, and then people, it's going to help that conversation.
Right. So you guys, we're also open for questions. So if you have any questions, please feel free to write it in the chat. I'll be happy to ask Rex your questions on your behalf. So, I mean, okay, so now of course we're in this pandemic, right? And I don't know, can you imagine yourself in February, or maybe like last December? What's so different that you didn't expect now versus where we are? Like, because this was so unprecedented and unexpected.
Right.
How do you see?
Well, in March 12th, I was on spring break with my family, and we were having a great time. And I was just beginning to hear about this virus and saying, oh, it's a virus. We'll be fine. And then within a week, I started getting cancellations. So 95% of all my events in business for 2020 disappeared before the second week of April. And so I certainly didn't expect that. And fortunately, I've been able to pivot. As you see, the studio that I'm in now is part of that pivot. So, and I didn't expect that I would be going from workshops to lots of coaching. So people are going to have to relook at business models, you know, what, how they're going to address resiliency. Uh, I think the big thing that I've seen, which is from the past research, is that the issues that we identified that were chronic and getting to an unsustainable point, they're now acute. 92% of deaths from COVID have been because of either obesity or chronic disease, those patients. So now if I'm a business owner, resiliency, the health and well-being of my employees now becomes, it's a survival strategy. It's not just we're going to lower cost, and it's now essential. So those are the different kinds of things in terms of what's it going to take to be a resilient organization over time, which means how do I develop resilient employees and resilient families? So now employers have to look at more of an ecosystem of survival rather than just a linear strategy.
Right. So isn't it, it's like interesting, right? We have to talk about survival, whilst before we were maybe not even thinking about survival being one of the
Right.
first things. So you mentioned your space, that the pivot included your space. Like, how is this current space different from what you had, and like, why is space such an important thing for you?
Well, my primary space before was an airplane and and a backpack. And so I
Hotel
kind
room.
of, hermit crabbed every place. I was just occupying space, very flexible. Now I create a lot of my content. So part of the change is, instead of delivering content live, I'm pre-recording. So now I have to have editing, and I've got to have lighting here. And this has to be a good experience. Learning all the new tools of coaching virtually, workshops virtually, creating all the support materials. So I've gone from, this was just a barren place to hold stuff. Now it's, it had to be ergonomic. So I'm going to demo. I've got a sit to stand work surface here. And then I've got recording equipment. I've got a back wall to do teaching on. So this is now everything for me. This is because I don't travel.
Right. I got it. Um, so I see from Tammy that we're doing part 2, the caregivers toolbox, next Tuesday. But that's next Tuesday. That with you, we're talking again next Thursday, right? The change management, a new way of working. That's coming
Yep.
up in on the same webinar next Thursday. But for now, we're still talking about space. And so you have lighting, you have a movable desk, you have an ergonomic chair. If somebody wants to improve their work from home space, what other tips do you have?
Well, and depending, like, for example, my daughter and her husband live in a 1-bedroom apartment with 3 dogs. So it's fairly limiting, and he has to use the bedroom with the bed as the desk with a kitchen chair. What I would say now is that people are starting to run into some health issues, so I would monitor any stresses and strains, neck strain, arm strain. If your arm begins to tingle, something is off. Movement. If you can stand, even if it's getting a really strong ironing board that you can put your desk on, move and work in different places in the house if you can. Go outside 2 or 3 times a day, take your shoes off and let your feet touch the grass. Uh, all of these little things make a huge difference because they're tiny habits or tiny behaviors that add up over time.
Right.
Uh, and so, space is the vital new area. One thing I think is going to happen for executives is that they're going to have their own personalized studios. Consultants are going to have personalized studios, and they're going to be able to touch more employees and turn around content more quickly because they're not having to go down to a studio to do it.
Right.
So they'll have a more personalized touch. The Zoom thing or the Google Meet thing is really a challenge. Uh, what we don't realize is the amount of calories, stress calories that are occurring when we do this. Normal stress calories during the day, your brain consumes about 25 to 30% of your calories a day. In this environment, it's 40 to 50% of your calories. Uh, and I get asked, well, why am I not losing weight? Well, you're not losing weight because they're stress calories, and you're probably compensating for that with some unhealthy coping
Chocolate.
behaviors after work. Um,
Right.
so this whole world has to be completely rethought because we've just been dumped into it. We don't have the disciplines and habits to know when to turn it off. One of
Right.
the disciplines we have is I only do 45-minute meetings with a 15-minute break in between.
Oh, that's very good.
So the new habits and new managing and making sure people are developing, their home environment so that they're conducive, is another area that's a huge learning curve for us. Uh,
Right.
we've got to get away from bad sound, bad internet connection. I mean, when you're held captive to the person who has the weakest bandwidth in their conference. So there's all these new technical things. I still am on Zoom conference calls where you're looking up somebody's nostril. Or I was on one just before this where the lighting was so bad or that they have backlighting and you can't see them. Those are just hygiene. That's just kind of meeting hygiene. And when it's a bad experience, that raises stress. So part of my doing this is to reduce your stress and make this a more enjoyable experience. That's part of the strategy behind it.
Right. 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 So we have a question from Mim. How can we monitor and avoid Zoom fatigue in the context of protecting employee health and well-being?
Uh, First is manage your calendar. So there's two things I do. I manage my energy versus my time. And then I schedule certain blocks of time for Zoom with good, generous in between time to recover. There's a good book by Cal Newport called Deep Work.
Mm-hmm.
And that helped me shift my focus from time management to energy management. So doing my best quality work early in the day, shifting to interactive, shifting to webinars or Zooms midday, and then easy stuff towards the end of the day, and then a hard break.
Yeah. What time's your hard break?
4:30, I go hit some tennis balls against the high school wall.
Oh, that's great.
And
Wonderful.
then my wife and I have what we call a digital sunset at 8 p.m.,
Mhm.
where we either wear blue blockers or we shut down all digital exposure uh, because sleep is the thing that's being killed during this COVID virus. Uh, and so that's one of my constant themes is the amount of sleep, the quality of sleep, and the habits to do that. Because I personally feel that if we improve the quality of sleep for everybody and make that part of our managing process, that will improve resiliency, will improve performance, but will also improve our moods and will be
Yeah,
much nicer people to live with.
tremendously. Yeah, definitely. I have another question. How can we help people that have been road warriors going forward? Like
Yeah, that's a
people
good
who used to be
question
like
too.
you,
What's that?
people who used to be like you, road
Yeah,
warriors.
I know. One of the interesting things for me, Janera, is that uh, I thought I couldn't survive working from home. I mean, all my business was based, But what I learned is that I gained 2 extra days a week of productive time, which I've then turned into creating content and creating more value in that creative space. Um, People in sales are definitely hurting during this time. Um, so, you know, I I'm not sure I'm a good one to ask what to do uh, differently getting back on the road. I know for me, I'm going to be much more selective about where I go. I'm going to increase my rates over what they were when I go. Uh, I'm going to give them more options to not go. You know, this is what we can do virtually. Uh, I'm going to offload more of the capacity to do stuff to my clients by training them, you know, train the trainer instead of my coming out and doing it. Let me build the capabilities inside. I think that lets me address more people, put more value into their hands, and keeps me off the road. So my wife has a dishwasher every night. Um, you know, somebody who does pots and pans versus, you know, leaving Monday, showing up on Friday and wondering who this stranger is.
Yeah, definitely. So I think it's interesting that you say that, like relationships, having your people in your space all the time, everything is changing, right? So it
Yeah.
can be
Yeah.
for the better, and it can also be like, expose much that was sort of hidden, you know.
Well, and I think what we found with some of my clients who thought you had to be in the office to be productive, uh, that that's gone away. They've seen, wow, we can be productive. I'm really hoping that it resets us to really think about what it is we do, what it is we really need to do what we do, and then how do we rehumanize, get off the treadmills that we were on. And everybody has been touched by this. I was talking to a leader the other day talking about his personal experience, sacrifice, and pain, and how it's made him a better leader through this. Nobody has escaped this. Everybody is going through one of the 5 stages of grief and probably oscillating through those stages.
Hmm.
So we have this human connection that we've all experienced something that has touched us. And I'm just hoping that leaders do what they need to do, which is take this common experience and retranslate it in. How do I help our company be its best? How do I help my people become resilient and be their best?
Yeah. Resiliency. And I also really like what you said about sleep, because that's definitely one of the things that's, off my radar. Good sleep, like it's gone.
Well, it's interesting. So I asked 2 questions on every coaching session at the very opening. I ask, how are you doing? And then I pause. And then I said, how did you sleep last night? Now I usually get an answer to the first one, but the second one, I get nonverbal answers. I get head drop or something like that. And that's pretty common. And I really do think that sleep is probably the one thing. If I was going to pick just one thing to improve everything, it would be improving sleep.
Yeah. And so turning off your devices earlier and making sure that, I know that I used to work with an organization called Urban Zen, where it was all about integrative health and well-being,
Oh,
and
nice.
all these different methods of improving sleep. One of them was putting lavender oil on your feet.
Yep.
Sounds weird, but it really worked.
Well, and lavender oil on your temples too.
Hmm. Yeah. We have one last question quickly. How do you approach your employer to allow employees to get breaks during work, not just lunch?
Wow. Uh, that's that's a tough question. So what I look for and what I've seen is effective grassroots change is finding what I call the collection of the curious, people who are similarly interested, uh, have conversation, look at how you might approach a boss on this, and look at what their fear is, what their concern is, and address the concern. The concern may be, I don't know if we're going to get enough done, but it has to be a collective voice with some understanding where the boss is coming from, and then begin to show and prototype or test uh, examples of improvement. You know, most people want some kind of evidence that, okay, I'm not just going to give you an entitlement, but if there's a return on this, speaking the language that your boss speaks if you're going to go to them for something.